All right, I'll do that next. So we're going to be talking about hip-hop therapy today. Thank you for signing on and joining me. I'll have a special guest, Zaiire. He's a hip-hop artist based in London. I hope he got the right time since we're in different time zones to do this Instagram Live. But so basically, how I got interested in hip-hop therapy, I am a clinical psychologist, but I also do hair. And so in thinking about hair-based interventions, of course, then I started thinking about barbershop interventions and to think about how the best culturally relevant approach would be to utilize protest music and hip-hop in healing. So thanks for joining. I think our guest, he's connecting now. Okay, you're there, but you're to the side.
Am I to the side? All right, I'm going to turn it over. There we go.
All right. Welcome, Zaiire. Thank you so much for joining me today. What time is it there?
It's 5 p.m. in the evening.
Okay, 5 p.m. All right. So thank you so much for joining me. I was just sharing that this is focused on hip-hop therapy and how my entry point into it was through barbershops. So I'm not a hip-hop artist myself. I appreciate the movement, but I don't necessarily participate in it in the same way, but realizing this is the way people channel protest, channel energy, channel creativity, channel Africanness. And so, of course, I wanted an expert on this topic in understanding the relationship between healing, psychology, and hip-hop. So thank you, Zaiire. Tell people about yourself.
Where do I start? I guess I could just kind of bridge it in how we came together and how that journey kind of happened. And it started, I guess, at UDC. And I was an international student raised in London, but my parents are both from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I consider myself Congolese as well, just born in London. And I ended up studying at UDC. And I actually was thinking about it prior to this when we organized it, of how we actually met, if I could remember exactly how we met. And I was able to pinpoint it to a specific day. I think two of my friends were taking your class, actually, but I had not quite taken your class. And I was waiting for them in the doorway after. And I remember you speaking to the class about giving them the option to retake a quiz or something. And you came outside and you asked me what my name was. And after I told you my name, you kind of just paused and looked at me and said, you need to take one of my classes. And I think that was the moment. So it was pretty like instinctual, I think. So, and then from there, it kind of grew into research.
Okay. Yeah, definitely you were a top student. I'm happy you took my recommendation. And so one of the things that stands out to me was your level of political analysis and how you could oftentimes relate your political analysis to even hip hop. I know most professors don't want students scribbling in class, but I noticed your notes were like rap lyrics and like poetry that would be inspired by the lecture. And so you would sometimes then come to me after class, like, look what I wrote in class today based on the lecture, that you were actually writing poetry and songs based on psychology lectures. And I had never seen a student do that before. I'm like, people do that? But it was so, you would have pages in a notebook of all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, we need to collaborate, that you are a great thinker and writer and artist. And so part of my psychotherapy research lab, I always want to pick the best students. So I'm like, okay, come do this work. And so in thinking about barbershops in particular, we think about, well, what music is playing, what people are wearing, what are the conversations based in. And it is hip hop. Hip hop is a culture, right, that Black men actively participate in. And also when we think about the history of it, was really coping with race and racism. Black and Latinos, right? I don't want to leave out Indigenous and all of that, but so just even thinking about some of the issues that come up for Black men in terms of mental health, that 1 in 3 have had some form of incarceration at some time in their life, which causes a whole bunch of mental health issues. About 20% experience serious mental illness. And about 45% of Black men experience extreme forms of trauma, right? And so to think about how all of this can be entered into space of what is authentic and community-oriented healing paradigms. So I guess we can go deeper in terms of the hip hop therapy, in terms of thinking about the history of hip hop. So I know you all are also a historian. Do you want to give us some insight in terms of how you think or what you know of the history of hip hop?
I guess I could start. A lot of the history of hip hop is credited to the Bronx and starting kind of like in New York, starting in the park, starting with 2 turntables and a mic. The history goes back to the forefathers like Grandmaster Flash and people like African Bambaataa. But I think there's the physical history of it, and then there's also like a spiritual history of it, and there's also like a sonical history of it. And the way I look at the sonical history of like hip hop, if you look at it, the most sampled artist in hip hop is James Brown. Mainly because James Brown's drummer was the one who created the 4-beat loop, which is the basis of all hip hop today. Right? Someone mentioned Kool Herc, right? There's so many people, but without James Brown drummer, the sonical sound that you hear in hip hop of that 4-beat loop that turns into 8 beats would not even be a thing. So some people go as far back to say that James Brown was the beginning. Then you have people who would argue that artists like the Last Poets and Gil Scott-Heron, who were poets who were speaking over very drum-based production, was also hip-hop. So it really just depends where you kind of fall in line to it or what you agree with as like the basis of it. There's other people who argue that one of the core elements, which is known as like the 5 elements, is knowledge itself, is an element that dates back to the continent. And we talk about griots in Africa who were storytellers and who used beats to kind of tell their stories and used it for different purposes. So I think it just really depends where you kind of see the inception of it. And the journey kind of goes from there, I guess.
Okay, you're really tapping into the historical spiral cycle. I think that it's incorrect for us to assume a linear history of hip hop, considering that it's always been a part of our cultural practices to engage in certain aspects of the culture. Okay, so what are you saying are the elements of hip hop? Because you're like, well, there's an extra one. Let's just even define it. So go through these elements of hip hop.
So I would say that the main 5 that have always been identified would be, of course, you have the art of like MCing, which is the actual rap in itself, which is the poetry in motion. You would have the DJing, which was one of the things that tied it to that early culture in New York of the DJ and the MC. Then you have B-boying and B-girl, which is the breakdancing, right? Movement has always been a part of hip-hop. It started at the parties and it was a way for people to kind of jam and move and express themselves. Then you have graffiti, which was a very big part of the elements. And I always kind of like to draw parallels, especially in like a lot of the research that we did. I like to draw parallels between graffiti and hieroglyphics. Like it was another form of being able to scribe and to document things and document names and document times and different things like that. And the 5th element would be that element that's knowledge itself that people often speak about. And I think that's an element that goes back to the beginning of time. Like everybody has always wanted to have a deeper knowledge of self or like a deeper understanding of who they are and stuff like that. So I would definitely say those would be the 5 main elements.
All right, you're getting Black Tower fist with that. It just makes me think about how youth really led this movement too, right? In terms of when we think about the Bronx and think about these elements of hip hop, that it was coming from poverty, was coming from violence or lack of opportunities. They say a lot of the schools didn't have music programs, right? So to think about how people were able to voice their creativity in spaces and with the materials that they had. And so to even think about that hip hop initially was hip hop was a way to critique society, right? Almost holding a mirror to society, like this is what's going on. Now, who would you say, I guess, how did you get into the movement and the culture of hip hop?
I got into so I have a very interesting experience just being the fact that I grew up in London. right? So London had its own musical movements at the time, and it had its own kind of culture that was, at the time, felt outside of hip-hop. It was like an extension, but outside. So we had movements like the grime culture, and we had movements like garage and drum and bass that were very big at the time. And even though you had people who were rapping, the tempos moved differently. Grime was a little bit quicker, but we always were quite connected to hip hop and knew where it came from. So when I got into hip hop, I want to say I was about 7 years old, and the only reason I remember was because 50 Cent came out, and that. Oh my
gosh, really... you're making me feel old.
Yeah, so like I was very young. I was very young. I had to kind of backtrack to go and find like the history of it. But at that point, when he had come out, I had found like a connection to hip hop, and I did feel like a real connection to it that made me want to go back and find different things. And I think the movement started with sampling, and I think samples I think it's something that people often overlook. But even through the conversations we had, and even the research, you have like people like Karimi, who wrote in like an article in like 2006 when he was doing his research, conducted his research. He talked about sampling being something that is deeper than just music. The same way you have like producers who take pieces of a beat, they might loop it and create something new. We all have like a sampled consciousness where we take different pieces of our experiences, different pieces of our trauma, different pieces of like the good, the bad, and all of that. And that's how we create our overall consciousness. So I think sampling was a big key for me in terms of going back and figuring out, okay, so I hear a song that has a sample on it. If in a hip hop song in the present, I was always very curious about where the samples came from. I was very curious about where, like, what was the music that was being used to create this new music. And I think that's how a lot of my love for older music came. And that's how I was able to go backwards and start to think, okay, well, where does this come from? And where did this come from? And it took me on a complete journey. And that's pretty much how I got into the movement of just wanting to know where it came from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so did you just start like your own process? Did you start writing lyrics? Did you start from did you join a group? Like, what is your unique history in terms of becoming a practitioner?
I started writing when I was about 10, but at the time you don't realize what you're doing. You're just writing because I had an older brother who wrote. So I wanted to kind of I remember I asked him to teach me how to structure like 8 bars. And as soon as he taught me how to structure 8 bars, I took it away and I said, my only goal is to be better than him. Like, I just wanted to be better than him. So it wasn't until I got a little bit older and things started happening in our community, things started happening to my friends. We're experiencing different things outside that we don't understand why these things are even happening. That then you start to write about your experiences, and then you start to write about, and you start to realize that, okay, wait, I can write this down and it can help me get through certain things that I'm going through. So I think the more life started to happen, and the more aware I became of even things like racism and things like systematic oppression and the different things that we go through, the more I realized that it was more of a tool than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of my journey into writing. And from the moment I started writing, I never stopped. I always wrote. I just didn't know what I was going to do with it, or whether it was even going to become music or become something that I would then go on to. And I always kind of have that conversation with my friends where everybody else kind of saw it before I did. Maybe I was just stubborn, or maybe I was just like in denial. But now looking back, I can see it's like, it feels like it was always going to go this way. But at the time, I was very just focused on just getting things out and getting things down.
Mm-hmm. Look, your research sister is writing to you.
Okay. Hey.
Remember, it's Letitia. Remember when you guys had a presentation in my class?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you guys were able to relate, what was it, like Freud to hip hop? Is that what your project was on?
Freud.
Defense mechanisms in hip hop. Wasn't that your topic for clinical psych? Letitia, is that the topic? I feel like you did something about defense mechanisms.
It does ring a bell. It does ring a bell. It rings a bell. It does ring a bell. It does ring a bell.
Well, I'm even thinking about our work together. So as we decided to do a meta-analysis, basically reviewing what every published article said about hip hop therapy, right? Using every psychology, health related topic to find what are the researchers saying, right? Because we didn't come up with hip hop therapy. That's something that existed and has been talked about for maybe about the past 20 years, called hip hop therapy. But I remember I have a moment of memory where we were going to do a presentation, and I'm like, okay, can I call you your old name? Okay, so Zaiire. I'm like, Zaiire. So that's your hip. I'll use that name. I'm like, I remember we were sitting in a classroom, and I said, all right, we're about to go to public with this. Because you were like, oh, I could do like a freestyle. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a freestyle right now in class.
Yeah, you put me on the spot. You put me on the spot. Yeah, I remember.
Like, no beat. I'm like, do you need me to bang the desk? Do you need me to...
I remember, yeah.
And you blew me away. That's why I'm like, okay, this is some legit stuff. Because I'm like, for you to be freestyling in class, I'm like, all right, I approve of this officially. You can do this research publicly with me now. So.
Yes, you have to make sure I passed the test. I was credible.
I'm pretty sure I've never asked a student to freestyle in class before that or after that. So thank you for letting me have that moment to test your authenticity. But I also remember going to a bookstore in Baltimore called Everyone's Place. And so as we were discovering this topic, I saw a book that was called Rap Therapy by Don Elligan. And so I said, oh, let me get this for Zaiire. And so I brought it back, and I know you devoured that book. Can you tell some of the people a little bit about that book and the experience of reading it on your end?
Yeah, so I guess for the people listening, Don Elligan was a psychologist in Chicago, and very early on into his private practice, he was working with at-risk youth and different types of youth that were going through traumatic experience in Chicago. You know, I think most people are familiar with the climate of Chicago and what it's like for Black people in Chicago and Black kids especially. And he spoke in his book early on about the challenges of trying to connect with these kids when they would come into his office and stuff. Sorry about that, but so when they would
the ring even sounds British.
Yeah, it's very, very different and potent. But where was I? Yeah, so he spoke about trying to build a rapport with these children, and for a long time he struggled until he came to a certain point where he realized a lot of these children were coming in to his office already listening to what he later describes as like the soundtracks to their life. And they would come in reciting these lyrics, and he started to think to himself like, okay, what can I do with this? You know, and before long, he started to use the music as like a gateway and a conduit to open up conversations about the things that were going on in their life. He often found that the aggression in the music that they were listening to that he didn't necessarily agree with was more so of a reflection of what they were going through versus them just trying to be rebellious. So he began to dissect these lyrics with them and began to kind of build his whole practice around the music itself. And what he found was, before I can kind of offer these kids alternatives and different types of music, because people have to remember, it was almost like two different generations of hip-hop meeting in one place. He was from that older era of hip-hop of Public Enemy and Tribe Called Quest, and hip-hop that, you know, an older generation would argue was much more conscious than what's going on today. I think a lot of people from my generation would argue differently, but those are semantics. But he just kind of was like, okay, how do I get them to listen to maybe what I grew up listening to, or how do I get them to switch and maybe open up to something a bit more positive for them? And he realized it was by first understanding why they were listening to what they were listening to. And so it was a process of going through that music and taking them through it and going through it, dissecting it, before he could then offer alternatives and be like, okay, you listen to this, but have you heard this? And he ended up creating an entire framework that pretty much came with like song recommendations. He put together a framework of basically like a therapy kind of intervention that starts with lyric discussion, like I was explaining with the relationship and build a rapport, then moves into lyric writing, where he would get them to move from a passive form of music therapy into an active form of music therapy, which then begins where they start to write their own music or write their own poetry, write their own verses, and then perform it as well, and kind of use that as a way to deal with whatever they're going through.
Yeah. And reviewing some articles and even that book, that there truly is a framework. So I don't know if there are clinicians on the live right now, but I definitely recommend Rap Therapy by Don Elligan, because I have a little PowerPoint over here. I'm going to look at it. The first thing he talks about is assessment, right?
Yeah.
In terms of when you're meeting with a Black or Latinx adolescent, it would be good to assess if the person is influenced by hip hop culture.
Yeah.
So ask about hobbies. Ask if they reference hip hop. Ask why. So to even get into, well, what is the influence? I think, in 2018 when we were doing the research, it was the most popular form of music for adolescents, period. Teenagers, period. Young adults, period. Hip hop was the most popular genre and most listened to music. And so to even see how that the music or the culture, right, influenced them. And then the second one, step in that process for Rap Therapy, according to Don Elligan, was relationship building. So this is when you have the opportunity to talk about specific artists. And if you don't know who the artist is, he says, well, ask them to educate you about it. So to make sure that you see that artist from their eyes, because I could tell you, I am a different generation than you, and I'm some of the current stuff. I'm like, what are they saying?
Yeah.
So even for you right now, so since you're a different generation from me, who's a specific artist that you're listening to right now that's like part of your generation?
Part of this generation? Okay, I'm going to pin the name of the book and I'm going to comment the name of the book and the author so people can kind of get it. All right, so I think I'd be remiss to not mention like Kendrick Lamar as a front runner, someone from this generation that I think a lot of people look to, who's very vocal about what's going on. I think he's been very vocal since the start of his career up until right now. That's definitely like a reference point, I think, for other generations who might not understand what's going on right now. But I think there's so many. Like I could sit here for an hour and name artists from
top three of your generation in terms of specific artists.
See, it's so broad and diverse. There's so many opinions. I can't even do that. And then there's artists from the UK and from London that the rest of the world might not be privy to, that have always kind of represented things. So, and I think I referenced one of them the other day. I was talking about an artist named Swiss who made a song called Cry when I was growing up, or an artist called Bashi who's now an actor, but he made a song called Black Boys. And there's so many examples of those people. It's almost like a disservice to sit here and mention some of them and not mention others. I feel like I wouldn't be doing it justice.
Okay.
But
good political response.
But even to speak on what, like the disconnect in generation, I think that's such an important thing, because even when we were conducting the research, we were speaking about not even just in the Black community, but in other communities and other clinical research, the lack of research, period, pertaining to hip hop in music therapy was something that blew us away. And we're speaking about hip hop being the largest export of music across all cultures, and you still have music therapy or music therapists who have zero to little understanding of what hip hop means to this generation. And it's like, how can you then build rapport and understand your client, patient, and what they're listening to if you, one, don't respect the genre or the culture enough to even tap in and learn about it? And it's like literally no real scientific hard research. Like we struggled to find articles of scientific research that showed the effects of it being implemented into practice. And how can you call yourself a competent therapist without it at this point was like one of the main questions that came up.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Why do you think there's resistance from mainstream art therapists or music therapists to include hip hop?
I think it's the same systematic things that are in places that stop, Black people from doing many things. And I think part of it is kind of like in the field of research, one of the things I found was that it's a very like segregated field and a very elitist field where it's like people kind of don't care in a sense, but it's like, how can you not care when there's such a huge underserved population of people, even in therapy? You mentioned some of the facts and statistics of how more likely Black and ethnic groups are to experience mental health issues. And even when you look up the therapy statistics, you know, Black men especially are more than likely to quit therapy after the first session. I think it's about 50% of Black men quit therapy after the first session. And most of those things, we can speculate, come down to things like building rapport and the lack of representation and not feeling like they're understood in those spaces. And I think that's why hip-hop is so important, because it's not just a genre of music. You're talking about an entire culture and pedagogy that people use to even live their life. Like articles, or one of the things that we looked at, a study from 2016 by Sully. He had a kid in his study who basically said that, his name is Mario, that hip-hop is a way of life. Like, you know, and I can speak to my own experience, and I can say that there were certain conversations maybe in the household that me and my parents didn't have, that I had to go and find answers from somewhere else. The first place I turned to was hip-hop, and that's where I found a lot of answers. Right or wrong, for better or worse. Maybe some of them weren't the right answers, but that's where I went. And I think there's a lot of people like me who had that experience.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. And again, I appreciate you grounding your analysis in the research, right? In terms of recognizing that for the articles that were published, they were extremely meaningful, but even the resistance and the bias that exists around Black mental health in particular.
Yeah. Shout out to my friend Wes as well. That's one of my brothers. And he's right. There is a stigma around seeking help when dealing with mental health as well. That is definitely a big thing within the community.
Absolutely. So even going further into Don Elligan, so we said number 1 was assessment. Number 2 was relationship building, right? In terms of talking about specific artists. Number 3, he says, was to challenge the lyrics. Challenge by asking if the lyrics influence thoughts and observe patterns in relationships between the person's life and the lyrics. Help us understand that process of patterns and life and lyrics and how you think that connects together.
I think it's in everything. I think even the way people take in music, I think oftentimes when you take in music, the first thing that you're searching for within the music is yourself, whether you're conscious of it or you're not. Like, you're listening to the lyrics to see, firstly, can I relate to this? Can I find myself in the music? And it's interesting, I can speak to it even from being an artist. It's like people will come to you and highlight lyrics of yours and things of yours, and you might have one perception of what it meant in your mind, and they pull something completely different that was outside of what your intention was. But who are you as an artist to tell them that they're wrong? Because that's how they identify with whatever's being written. So I think to challenge the lyrics is really just to, when he moves on to start talking about challenging the lyrics, is really just to see if the person is really aware of what they're listening to and aware of how the lyrics are affecting them. Because it speaks to something much bigger, which is the fact that this music that we listen to can actually help or hurt us from a sonical standpoint as well, which is a whole nother branch of research that we could get into as well. And I think it's important, and it's something that you can't miss out.
Yeah. Okay. People are hyping you up right now. Yeah, and basically this challenging the lyrics helps the person to gain insight in how they're being influenced, right? Because when we think about the neural patterns of the brain, that rhythm is actually how, our brains function. And so if we can get on a certain vibe, positive or negative content can get in there. So as psychologists, I'm so mindful of how words and language and beats get into our subconscious too, right? Even outside of our control. So I'm very cautious sometimes what I listen to, because that beat can get you. And so sometimes we're not even paying attention to the lyrics. And it's like, that's what that person's saying.
So you can fly. Go ahead.
So it's good to unpack it to see what you do identify with versus what you don't, and again how that the words can actually influence your thinking process. All right, and then number 4, according to Don Elligan, in his rap therapy intervention model is to begin writing. So begin writing to see how the words can improve life satisfaction and find solutions. So getting in the writing process. So talk a little bit more about that writing process.
So the writing process, there's different ways that it can be applied, because I also bumped into research of people who took Don Elligan's framework and took it from like an individual writing process and even opened it up to like a group writing process. So the writing process literally was just sitting down, and he had different ways that you can do it. You could do it in the sense where there's free form of writing, where they just write off the script and they kind of write to their heart's content, or they took like sampled choruses and songs that they appreciated and was like, okay, you write a verse to this same song that you like or that you're interested in, and what would be your verse or your take on this kind of on this song. And I guess it speaks to the larger practice of active music therapy, which is something that dates very prehistorically. You know, like the research that suggests that goes far back as like ancient Egyptian civilizations of using art therapy and specifically music therapy. As the way it's written in some research, it's almost as though like in ancient civilizations, music therapy and art therapy was almost mandatory to deal with what was going on in life, and everyone had to kind of find the form of expression. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm starting to identify more as a writer these days. In terms of like, you know, now that I got books and articles and stuff out, and it definitely is a healing process, how to externalize your internal world, right? In terms of being even a narrative therapist, when you tell your story, you have an emotional release. It's cathartic to get these thoughts that you've had in your head out. That's the point of therapy, right? In terms of talking something out, because what we don't talk out, we act out, we perform. So I always am getting my clients to do journaling activities or writing, because it can really document their thought pattern and process and make sense of things that they had just been thinking about. So somehow the way that our brains work, we actually can heal through writing. And so I think that that's a critical part of the hip hop movement, is to really verbalize or write out things that have been on our mind, so it doesn't have to have the same weight or stress related to it.
Someone asked if you got bars, Dr. Afiya.
See, I tell Zaiire in the past that I have two older brothers, one born in the 70s and one born in the early 80s. And I can remember being in the basement, and my brothers would put on music. And so we would be having a cipher. And so I would be getting all hyped when it was my turn. Like I was about to jump into double dutch, like, and I just sang it real quick. But it was like, you know, I'm like 8 years old just rhyming. But it was definitely a family ritual. And when my brother would come home from college and would have a new song, like, have you guys heard about this person? I'm like, no, what is it? And then he put it on and just started going. So it's funny because now I'm feeling like I've really lost that aspect of myself because of like, no, I can't do that. But that actually is part of my family root. So maybe one day I'll come out with an album. And
that feeling, think about, like, you speak about feeling like you lost that. And one thing, again, that we would always say, or one thing that was very big within the research or going to presentations and telling people, is that I'm from the school of, I think everybody is like a musician innately. Like, we're all vibrational and everything is vibrations on this plane. And everybody intrinsically is an instrument. We speak about everyone has a heartbeat, right? That's your beat. That's your natural beat that you have. We talk about your pulse, which is like a drum kick. We speak about the way we speak in iambic pentameter being in rhythm, right? So you're literally naturally flowing over your own instrument. We talk about our body has organs, like that's an instrument, right? Everything is sonic, is very vibrational. So I think everybody has it. It's just whether you tap into it or not. And then again, that's why you put on certain songs and it makes you feel good, because it's literally interacting with the vibrations that it feels, and it's bouncing off of your vibration. So it has the ability to go up, down, anywhere on the spectrum, depending on the power of it. England is in the house. Hey, appreciate everybody from the UK that is tapped into this live as well.
Yeah, we have an African diaspora conversation here. the UK and the US in terms of that connection through hip hop and barbershops too, because I know there's a whole barbershop UK culture. And I want to get into even the last point that Don Elligan brings up. You keep following those. I'm going to read that. Okay, you maintain.
Yeah, I'm trying to pay more attention to the comments.
Okay. So his last one. So just to go over for people joining. Number 1, assessment. Number 2, relationship building. Number 3, challenge the lyrics. Number 4, begin writing. And number 5, according to Don Elligan in his book Rap Therapy, is maintenance. So write songs about keeping the change and maintain progress. All right. So tell me about that. How do you maintain these things?
I guess it's just persistence, really, and just like a commitment to. I think once you start to see the effect of it, like even the way he took like a lot of these clients through this process, by the time they got to the end, they realized how powerful it was. So I think a lot of the times people need to see the effect of it to truly commit to it. But by the time they get to the end of the process as he's framed it, they'll be more inclined to kind of say, okay, I'm committed to continue to keep writing even when I move away from this. And a lot of them some of them even started coming to therapy with material that they had written outside of. So it just becomes like a practice and like a discipline that you start to, it's like exercising at the end of the day. You know, the same way you exercise your body, you have to exercise your mind. So you just have to be mindful that the mind is a muscle just like anything else.
Okay. So even for somebody like me, I should be doing this?
Yeah, and when we talk about hip-hop, it's like a spectrum, right? So we spoke about different elements, like there's movement, like just dance, there's different ways of doing it. There's poetry, there's, you know, I think hip-hop encompasses a lot more than just being able to rhyme over a beat or being able to flow. And so I think you just find what works for you, and then you just tap into that.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's so much value healing-wise that psychologists are not tapping into. And this is a real injustice in terms of a mismatch between how we're trained in the practice of mental health. I know that in therapy sessions, I have played music. I know in therapy sessions, I've had people write. But I'm thinking about the other elements I haven't engaged in as much. But again, talk therapy can be, it sounds like a form of hip hop therapy. If we are producing this content and set within a particular culture, that's it. Okay, I'm going to quiz you real quick. You ready for a quiz?
Wow, right. Pop quiz on the spot. Right.
Yeah, for you. That's my former student. Okay. All right, how does Dr. Wade Nobles define culture?
Oh, Dr. Oh, wow. How does Dr. Wade?
You know, I ask this all the time.
I'm gonna paraphrase because I don't know. I don't have the specific words, but I know it's like a set of guidelines and a way of living. It's like he describes it as a set of guidelines by which people live and the way they express themselves and, you know, do different things within their life. So that could be anything from, you know, like their spiritual belief system to the way they eat together. But yeah, I remember the guidelines.
Okay, you got a connection problem.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's blurry. Let me check the connection real quick.
So according to Dr. Wade Nobles, who I'll actually have a phone call, Zoom conference thing with later today, he says that culture is a design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. All right. So in 1986, Dr. Wade Nobles.
We was right here. You was on L Street. I was on M Street.
Okay. It was the connection issue. But a design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. So even within that, hip hop is a culture, right? In terms of how to see the world, how to interact with it, and how you live your life. So just even thinking about how to really engage in a culture. And as we know, cultural competence is critical. Every multicultural journal or whatever will tell you that you need to understand someone's culture in order to engage them therapeutically. So I know that this wasn't necessarily part of the script, but how do you think hip-hop therapy can be used right now for all the stuff, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's, you know, race riots, like, or just protest? How do you think hip hop can be used right now?
I think it could definitely be used as an outlet for what is going on in describing the times. I think there's ample material in terms of music that has come out from now to dating back to 2 decades ago, you know? And I think a lot of it can be dissected and pulled up now to explain what's going on right now. And I think it can be used in the form of group interventions. Like, one thing that I think that does need to happen right now, and these are like conversations that I've been having amongst my friends in person, is that I think group interventions should really be pushed in a time like this. Because in a time like this, when so much is going on, we're all trying to move towards like a unified place, but a lot of the times we don't even know if we're all going in the same direction. We just know we're all moving, right? We want things to change, but what is it exactly that we are actually looking for specifically? So I think that people do need to come together and have these conversations amongst their communities and amongst their people, because even amongst me and my friends, we might have the same school of thought, but there might be discrepancies in what we think specifically about times like now. But that's why I feel like hip-hop therapy can be applied in terms of group interventions right now, and it would be very effective. I think people just getting outside themselves, being able to express themselves and write and, you know, have a platform to speak on it. In explaining that, it reminds me of even an intervention program that is actually happening, that was created, and it's actually taking place in Congo. It's an intervention program that was created by the Pansy Foundation, and it was in conjunction with the Music Matters. It's Music Matters, and I think they're based in Canada. And what they do is they work with many women who are survivors of sexualized violence and trauma. And what they do is, hold on.
Okay.
They work with groups of women who have survived sexualized violence and trauma, and they teach them how to write. They pair them with a psychologist and with a musician who's a producer, and they teach them how to write music. They even go as far to record this music and produce this music. And what happens is, within their communities in Congo, they reach out to the local radio stations, and they then broadcast the music made by the women in their community. They even go as far as having charity events, where they put on charity events, and these women get to perform the music that they've made during these therapy sessions and really express themselves. And I think that stuff like that would be effective in a time like this to kind of push people together and bring out that solidarity.
Yeah, I like, again, how you make the connection for existing interventions, and especially for populations that you wouldn't necessarily think would be having a hip-hop therapy intervention. What I'm curious about is your artistry. How have you been using this time as an artist to engage in therapeutic work?
That's a good question. I think it ranges. I think the one thing you can't do as an artist is ever force things. So I know, you know, speaking to a lot of people who are creatives in a time like this, they're not inspired or moved to even write. They just kind of want to observe and kind of feel things out. For myself, I think it's been a bit of both, where there's days where I can sit down and just scribble for days and days. And there's other days where I wake up and it's like, it's not where my focus is. So I think it's being able to listen to yourself and understand what you need, as well as being able to kind of find the balance in actually creating. But for me, a lot of the therapeutic hip-hop therapy that I've been doing has been very like passive music therapy in terms of listening to it. I've been listening to a lot of music during this time to make sure that, you know, I stay up, I stay in a good space and stuff like that. So a lot of listening to music has definitely been a thing. And I have found very good pockets in between that to create and be able to kind of pen how I feel as well.
Okay. And do you have any recent projects that have come out recently? Ooh, I see questions too.
So I think it was yesterday. Was it yesterday? I did release a song called Me Grow Spiritual. And it was just like a social commentary, I guess, on what's been going on and how I feel like a lot of Black people and other minorities. I don't really like the term minority, so I won't say like other ethnic groups have been feeling under the current climate of what's going on. And so that was the last thing that I did. And behind the scenes, just been constantly working on a bunch of different projects. And yeah, shout out to Luke, my boy Luke as well, who said he's been cooking. Yeah,
so it's called Me Grow.
Yeah, it's called Me Grow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Me Grow Spiritual.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can we listen to that?
It's currently on YouTube, and the link is on my Instagram bio, and yeah, so it's currently on YouTube, and I think that's the only place it's really gonna go, just because of the way I feel about. Yeah, that's a whole nother. Mm-hmm. So we just kept it to YouTube for now.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Me Grow using YouTube. Yeah. What about previous work? How can people?
So previous work, there's stuff all over the place. You know, you can go on Spotify and type in Zaiire. You can find different stuff that was like older experiments on SoundCloud. You can find, I think West has posted a link to the song in the chat. Shout out to West. Yeah, there's a bunch of different places. Like a lot of my posts are related to music with links as well that people can kind of find and check out as well. So there's a bunch of stuff all over the place, I feel like.
Okay. And you even have appeared on my stories.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm good. But if you listen to some of my videos, it's actually Zaiire.
Yeah. Thank you. I did peep that. There was a lot of, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
So I definitely always try to support. Even I'm like, oh, okay. I hear some hair references. I gotta post. Okay, here's some mental health and self-care references. So your music definitely speaks to me in that way because of your training in psychology, along with your artistry. So I think that you've done that beautifully, being able to integrate what you've read.
I think that's a great segue because the research that I was doing, like with music therapy as well, and hip hop therapy, and even the research that I was doing in your lab, part of the psychotherapy lab, oftentimes I think, well, I guess internally for us, because I guess other people outside of it aren't really thinking about it, but I oftentimes always thought like they intersect incredibly because hair is such a big part of the culture as well. It's a big part of hip hop as well. You can't talk about black people without talking about hair and without talking about the
you see my hair? It's blue.
Yeah, I see the blue tips for the. I see the blue tips as well. Yeah. So I think it all connects very well.
Okay, and then how long have you been growing your locks for now?
You know what's crazy? I tried to calculate it the other day, and I think it's been 3, almost 4. I think it's been 3 years. I think it's been 3 yees. They've kind of taken on a life of their own. They're in need of real TLC right now as well. But we kind of do like it like this.
Okay, good. This is the free-forming lock period for sure for a lot of like, people who can't get their locks retwisted. But I guess I want to conclude. If anybody has questions for Zaiire, his expertise, definitely make sure to follow him, download his songs, listen to his
I didn't miss any questions as well, because I didn't really pay attention to the comments. This is the first time I've been live as well, so I missed it.
Oh, really? Welcome to the world of live.
Yeah.
You did a great job.
Yeah, no, and I feel like there's so much more I feel like that can be expressed about even just the research behind like what music does and how music can influence, and so many different civilizations that used music to even heal. And there's so much research that goes back to different time periods that is like solid proof of what it was able to do and how it was able to help civilizations get through and really heal. So I'm always mindful of that as well. And I hope that conversations like these can continue and people can, can be directed towards the research that they can go check out themselves. Because I think one of the things you always said to me was like, go check. Because even in the beginning of doing research, I had like a very weird relationship with research because I felt like so many of the answers were in my soul and I could feel it. Like it was really a challenge to go and have to find people who did the scientific research to confirm what I was already saying or what I felt. But in doing that, it made me appreciate the research so much more. So much more.
All right. So your lab mate keeps making requests. Do you have any desire to close us out with a freestyle? She keeps putting that into the question.
All right, so there's a freestyle. There's always also a question about what are you listening to. I wouldn't mind freestyling to end it. That's not a big deal. I can answer any questions as well. Someone asked, what am I listening to at the moment? I can answer that. And then if that's how much time we have, then I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, because I have a 1 o'clock therapy session. So I only have like 3 minutes before I need to go see my client.
What I'm listening to now, I've been listening to a lot of Bob Marley and the Wailers. I've been listening to Lauryn Hill's Unplugged. I went back and listened to Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. What else have I been listening to? I've been listening to a UK artist called Little Sims. Someone said, answer the question in the freestyle. Everyone.
Yes. I like that.
Wow.
I like, so linking Black Lives Matter to Black music with Black artists and treatment of Black artists. All right. Can you do that in a freestyle? This is the test. You know, I put you in
It's been a while, but we'll see where we get. We see where we get to. I don't mind. All right. We can get into it. I know you don't have much time. Okay. All right. Request a freestyle on the live. It's all right. I've been doing this for a while in the basement. The same places that they tried to erase us. This Black Lives Matter movement is really the central of all of our focus and basis. I've been listening to Little Sims. You know what? I used to think about a car with the rims, but then I thought that this is deeper. You know what? I have to think about Nas's ether. It breaks down the coke and the drugs in all of the neighborhoods that we grew. Look at the places that we grew up. I could have been a screw up. Instead, Dr. M helped me, and now I grew up a better man with a better plan. I'm trying to think about the other things I've been listening to. Damn. Lauryn Hill's Mystery of Iniquity that Kanye sampled on All Falls Down. I used to think I would fall down and never get up. So now I'm trying to better my luck. I'm a veteran, yup. Dropped a song yesterday called Negro. So now they look at me like a young black Negro that isn't educated, but he grows. And now I think about all my heroes and how they stood up in a time like this. You can't really get it off the mind like this. My mind is sharper. I think about all of the barbers that could be out getting a K cut. But now we have to sit inside, no trims, and now we look at it like we're living with no makeup. Yes, a trim is like makeup to a man. So you know what? I'm now strategizing about the plan of where we could take this. So we sit inside this house and we think about the mindful things that we could do to replace this and break this struggle and break this bondage. I'm trying to take my people beyond this. I understand it's political, but it's also economical, and getting money is the system's favorite. How can they get money out of us? How can they do other things to us and screw us?
Yes, let's get some hearts, some Black Power fists. Thank you so much. This was amazing. You're so proud of you. You are living in your purpose. So aligning your consciousness with your destiny. Thank you so much. Black artists matter. Black men matter. Black people matter. So thank you so much for providing us with a soundtrack for African liberation. This was amazing. Look at all the fists, the thumbs, the hearts. Thank you so
to
much,
everyone
Zaiire.
that joined. I appreciate it, and I had a lot of fun doing this as well. This was definitely that was great.
Okay, we got to do it again. So it's counting down. We have 30 seconds left. Thank you so much. Please support Zaiire. Listen to his music. Follow him. This truly was a healing conversation today. Going through hip-hop therapy, revisiting the past, and thinking about the work that we need to do for the future, especially within this racial climate, health climate, and all of that. So thank you for doing this work that you do so much. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And I definitely have to